Today, I'm going to be doing a couple of things. I'm going to be talking about the spectrum of intuitive development, and then I'm going to talk about its terminology and tools. And it's likely to be a two-part series. There are so many terms associated with psychic mediumship. Each one of the terms is so interesting, I really doubt that you're going to fall asleep. Before I get started on that, starting in February 2017, I'm going to be offering a live webinar-based class entitled Professional Psychic Mediumship Certification Program. It will be offered through the Universal Mind, a 501c3, and you'll have an opportunity to become certified at different levels depending on your performance, and it will be a pretty exciting thing. So if you're curious about that, feel free to reach me on my website at MEDIUMTraceyLockwood.com, or you can send me an email at info@MEDIUMTraceyLockwood.com. And Tracy is spelled with an EY, so be sure you get there. That email will never get to me. info@MEDIUMTraceyLockwood.com. So what do I mean about the spectrum of intuitive development? Well, it's kind of a continuum. Everybody that's born has a basic human instinct, are seeking hot, cold, food, shelter, sex, very basic instincts. Then it kind of gradates into intuition, which is our knowledge. And we have dreams, psychic things that come to us. These are just bits of wisdom, and we don't really know where they came from, but we sound highly intelligent, and we're very helpful to those that hear those words, and it helps us to be able to perceive what's really going on in our worlds too. And then that goes through dream interpretation, where we're starting to be able to interpret the symbols that spirit gives us in dreams and get back to the original message that we experienced while we were in the dream state and have forgotten as we came to consciousness. We begin to do things that we call prophecy. We have an empathic ability, an ability to connect with people emotionally, and we can connect with them outside of time and space. So whether they're living or past, we can feel their past, their present, and their future. And that grades into mediumship. Mediumship is when we begin to discern the source of the information, identify it, classify it, describe it, and we create a mind-to-mind connection with those that are on the other side. And we can also create a mind-to-mind connection with the living as well, telepathically. That grades into channeling, which is bringing through those messages from people on the other side. The biblical expression would be tongues and the interpretation of tongues, which means that you might speak the language of the spirit or entity that you're connected with. And that's great, but it's kind of useless unless you can interpret it as well. So the interpretation of those languages is really important. And that's channeling. We've gone from the telepathic mind-to-mind mental mediumship into a deeper soul-to-soul connection. We get that emotional connection because emotions, they are the language of the soul. Again, that's a connection with people, whether they're living or past. Then it goes into physical healing. The old term for that was the laying on of hands, and now we call it energy medicine or, healing techniques. So the spectrum again goes from instinct to intuition to dreams to psychic ability, dream interpretation, prophecy, mediumship, channeling, emotional connection through empathy, and physical healing. I thought instead of just an alphabetical listing of terminology that's used in the professional discipline of psychic mediumship, that I would give them to you associated in conceptual categories. That hopefully will help you remember them and be able to see them in their context. So I wanted to start with the difference between a psychic and a medium. And I kind of alluded to it just now. A psychic is someone who gains accurate information about a person or situation and can feel where it's going to go or where it came from, past, present, or future. And they just have a wisdom about them and an ability to share that. Mediumship is when you start identifying the source of the information, being able to convey those messages accurately, give accurate descriptions of the person that you're speaking with or the spirit or entity that you're speaking with, and be able to take on, as you give those messages, the mannerisms and characteristics of that person, maybe their speech pattern or their habits, etc. So let's look at some of the ways that we connect at each of those stages: instinct, intuition, psychic, and mediumship gradation there. These are the stages of intuitive unfoldment: instinct, intuition, psychic ability, and mediumship. And so I guess I'll start with what is unfoldment. The process of developing your psychic and mediumship abilities, and it's opening your spiritual and psychic abilities. So unfolding is just a term for it that we use here in the field. Your unfoldment. It's your self-discovery of your innate abilities that you have, unfolding them like unwrapping a present. So at instinct, we don't really think of people that operate at that basic human survival level as having much intuition, but they do. Those of you that feel that you don't have any intuition, you do, because we all have a gut feeling. We all have a visceral reaction. We either like someone or don't like someone. We may have a very basic sense of fight or flight, run or find safety, good or bad. Are they someone you can trust or not trust? Those are instinct. And then that grades into intuition. Left brain is our analytical part. It's our thinking part. It's where the words are. When we begin to switch away from the left brain, the analytical part, more to the right mind or the right brain, where our subconscious is coming to the surface, that's the beginning of intuition. There are some left brain tools of intuition, and you might not have thought of it this way, and I don't know anyone else who has, but this is the way I put it together. One left brain tool is aura photography. It's also known as electrography or electrophotography. Basically, the Carillions, and that's Kirlians, and they conducted experiments in which photographic film was put on a conducting plate. Another conductor was attached to somebody's hand or to a leaf or a piece of plant material. The conductors were energized with a high frequency, high voltage power source, obviously not electrocution, or people wouldn't be wanting to have their auras photographed. They found is that by this high frequency power voltage running through somebody, that it produced on the plate an image that sort of looked like a silhouette of the image surrounded by an aura of light. This was back in 1958. They reported the results of their experiment for the first time. It wasn't until 1970 that it came to the US, and that's when Lynn Schroeder and Sheila Ostrander wrote a book called Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain. It became known to the general public here in the West as Kirlian photography. The images that are created show the energy field or the aura that surrounds us and is part of all living things. We're energy bodies. And it shows that, and it reflects our physical and emotional states. Energy healers and energy treatment practitioners use aura photography to help them diagnose illnesses and people's mental states, their emotional states, the areas of their chakral system that are not functioning as well. You can probably find them at a local body, mind, spirit, or local holistic living fair or event. They're kind of common. Another left brain tool is astrology, and I'm not going to go in depth for that because that alone is a monstrous topic. Basically, it's the study of the movements and relative positions of celestial objects. It's used as a means for divining information about human affairs and terrestrial events. It's been practiced for more than 2,000 years. It has been used to predict seasonal shifts, interpret celestial cycles, and help explain behavior and characteristics of people, pets, organizations, corporations, governments, and nations. I know most of you thought astrology was just a personal interpretation of you and your characteristics and possibly the influences that are going on in your life. It's much more than that and can be used quite broadly. There's the I Ching. The I Ching, that if you were to interpret it into English, means classic of changes. It's an ancient Chinese divination text, and it's been around for at least as long, if not longer, than astrology. They guesstimate about 2,500 years, and it's a really influential text. It's read throughout the world, and it provides inspiration to the disciplines of religion, psychoanalysis, business, literature, and art. It uses a type of divination called kleromancy. You might be like, what? Kleromancy? What is that? Mancy, just for your information, means reading or scrying, interpreting information. Kleromancy is casting lot. If you've ever heard of casting lot. I Ching specifically uses a process of sorting, counting, and resorting reeds that are all the same length and about the same diameter, and you sort and resort them, and it produces a random series of numbers. Generate 4 numbers ranging from 6 to 9 at each round. Then those are turned into what is referred to as a hexagram, which is a pre-drawn design that they have in the I Ching book. They're arranged in a specific order, and they call that the King Wen sequence. Now, I've taught I Ching before, and let me testify that process is really arduous, and it takes forever to get to a simple answer. I guess as you practice it, you would get faster, but it can take, 15, 20 minutes of sorting things just to get to a yes-no answer. So it's a pretty long way around, but like I said, these are left brain techniques. Another one is numerology. Numerology is the divine and mystical relationship between a number, one or more coinciding events. It is also the study of the numerical value of the letters in words or names, and it's associated with the paranormal along with astrology and several other different divinatory arts. For the beginning reader, I find that numerology is a great way to start a reading because that person's birth date can be used to calculate their life path number, which is a very simple calculation. You can look it up online to figure that out. There's numerology.com. That's a great resource. That number is influencing the current year, so you can figure out which year they're in. So with a basic understanding of what the numbers signify, you can get a quick confirmation of what it is that you're picking up psychically about your client. It just sort of gives you a little extra comfort there, should you need it. It's a fascinating study. Another left brain technique that you can use is paranormal investigation and using EVPs. And for you ghost hunters out there or parapsychologists, you know that that's an electronic voice phenomenon. It's basically things that are captured on an electronic recording. You can hear voices that were either intentionally or unintentionally requested and recorded. And typically they're brief, usually the length of a word or short phrase, but sometimes you get a whole sentence. And it's really interesting. There's some paranormal investigators that like to travel along with a medium, and sometimes the medium will actually get the message that they can't hear when they're recording. When they do the recording, their message is the same, or there's a related topic there, which is all very exciting and cool for us mediums too, because then we get the proof that they actually are there. I mean, we know they are there, but it's kind of wild to think that someone actually recorded the voice that we heard in our head on an instrument that's apparently more sensitive than the human ear. I think that's just super cool. So those are kind of our left brain tools of intuition. Our next category would be physical body tools of intuition. One word you're familiar with is an impression. I'm getting an impression. That's an impression on on your mind or in your senses, or getting a gut feeling regarding another individual. It's sort of a knowing. And then there's inspiration. And inspiration is the state of being where you become open to the influences, inspirations, and creative expressions of spirits or entities. You're not channeling yet, but you might be inspired by particular things and maybe not know where that inspiration comes from. It's the natural state of artists, musicians, writers, and poets, scientists, etc. There are a couple of other physical body tools of intuition. One of them is muscle testing. For those of you that have ever done probably an energy healing modality or something along that lines, they might have had you stick your arm out and say something false, and your arm collapses when they put pressure on it, and then say something true, and they put pressure on your arm and you hold strong. It's just using your body as an indicator of truth. Pendulum is another physical body way. I think most of you are familiar with that. Some people call it dowsing. It is probably a lot related to micro muscle movement. It's a body technique for discerning things. So is dowsing per se, like a dowsing rod. That's a type of divination that is used to locate groundwater or buried metals or ores, gemstones, oil, grave sites. Many objects and materials. It's known as divining. The term divination comes from that. Doodle bugging, which I thought is a cute term, which is searching for oil using a stick and not any scientific method. Water finding, water witching, water dowsing. You've probably heard of those things. And you basically use a Y or L-shaped twig or rod called a dowsing rod or divining rod to sense where the water is underground or where the grave site is. It's starting to cross over into some of those higher levels of divination, which are our psychic ability. Psychic ability is someone who has that demonstrates that they can pull significant information from their subconscious, but may not be able to identify the source. Exactly. We all have a desire to know the future. It's really natural, but a person that uses a divination tool, the person, the reader, profoundly affects the end result. It depends on the depth of their interpretation. The results of a reading using a divination tool can, at their very best, be highly accurate and extremely detailed, but they can also range to overly simplistic and, in some cases, hurtful. So it's not the tool that's magic, it's the interpretation of what the information is that comes through that tool. And the effect on your client is not only determined by your skill as a reader, but how they act upon your interpretation. And their reactions can range from gratitude for the deeper understanding that they gained when they've received a reading from a skilled interpreter, to a fear-based reaction, which is usually the result of a poor or unethical reader, or can be an embedded fear within the client themselves, a religious belief or something that obstructs their ability to relate to the information that's been given. And the consequences for the clients can range from an acceleration of energy and an increase in confidence to taking actions that aren't just ignorant but can be somewhat brutal. And I'm thinking, like in the case of determining the fate of somebody based on whether they can literally sink or swim, like they did to the so-called witches of Salem. There's really nothing magic about the process of divination. It's a simple process of switching your brain to be able to receive subconscious information. Unfortunately, in ignorant and overly simplistic use, as in yes-no answers, it can be horribly misapplied. I've researched as many tools and methods of divination as I could, and I'm going to tell you about them, but you'll find that they're going to vary as to whether they're used to deepen consciousness and access truth, or merely as an arbitrary tool to dictate an outcome. And so remember that it's never inappropriate to be kind, and without integrity, you really have nothing. The first of the divination tools that are helpful in switching the brain in the psychic state from the left brain analytical to the right brain intuitive is aeromancy. It's also called aerology. That is interpreting atmospheric conditions, looking at the cloud formations, the wind currents, cosmological events like comets, and trying to forecast the future through that method. And nephomancy, which is cloud divination. And I'm sure that most of you have done that, where you sat back and looked at the clouds and either got an answer or saw symbols in the clouds. It's pretty easy to do. And all you have to do is take it one step further. If you see a rabbit in the cloud or you see a dragon in the cloud, start feeling out, what does that mean to you, and how does that apply to the situation in your life and the life of other people around you? There's also chiromancy, and I know people are like, what? Chiromancy? That's palmistry. You've heard of reading palms, right? And that's basically evaluating a person's character or future by reading the palm of that person's hand. And it's a scrying technique. Scrying is when you look at something and you relax your mind and the symbols begin to take on significance and help you understand a situation at a greater depth. And people look at the lines and the relative sizes of the lines on someone's palm, the quality of the line, the way they intersect. Some traditions examine the characteristics of the fingers and the fingernails and fingerprints and the different skin patterns on the palm, its texture and color, the shape of the palm, the flexibility of the hand. And a reader usually begins by reading the person's dominant hand, but the other hand represents the subconscious mind. So sort of the dominant hand is sort of what's going on in their physical life, and then the other can be their subconscious or heredity, family traits, past lives even, or even karmic conditions can be read that way. I've not developed that skill. Maybe I don't need to look at a palm to be able to do that, but it's an interesting way to do things. Claromancy is a form of sorting. We talked about I Ching, and so that's about sorting lots, and that's been in the New Testament. The apostles cast lots to determine whether Matthias or Barsabbas was going to be chosen to replace Judas, and in the Coptic Orthodox Church, drawing lots is still used to choose the Coptic Pope. We will be back at the other side of the hour with some more terminology of psychic mediumship.
Back to our show from a medium's perspective with host Reverend Tracey Lockwood.
Welcome back. If you missed the first half of the show or you'd like to listen to any of our past episodes, you can find them on YouTube. Just if you want to subscribe to the channel, which I would love it if you do, you can just put in Medium Tracey Lockwood and you'll find it. I have another term related to palmistry. We were talking about the different terminology and tools of psychic mediumship in the last half. And another term that goes along with palmistry is chiromancy, is dermatoglyphics, and that's just interpreting skin patterns and textures. There's another psychic level tool that's helpful for switching your brain from left to right, from analytical to intuitive, and that's face reading. And that's assessing a person's character or personality from their outer appearance. And you look at the shape of the face, the way the bones are, etc., and it can tell you quite a bit about that person. They have found out that you can pretty assuredly, some facial characteristics can give you references to 3 elements of the personality, and that's power, warmth, and honesty. Those power, warmth, and honesty can be accurately inferred, but it's an interesting way to read somebody. Another one is hydromancy, And again, Mancy, Mancy, is just a word for reading or scrying, looking at, like relaxing your brain as you look at something. So hydromancy would obviously be water, using water for divination. And there are all kinds of ways to look at that, not just the color and ebb and flow or ripples of that, but there are just a lot of different ways to do that. You can look at the motion of a fountain. You can throw in 3 pebbles and read the circles as they form and see how they interface. Observing the motion, drop a drop of oil into a container of water, it kind of creates like a mirror on the surface, and you can start imagining images and concepts that become visible to you. And when I say imagining, a lot of people are like, well, yeah, but isn't imagining like full of it? Like, I can't even trust it. No, that's actually not true. Our imagination is our gateway to the intuitive side of ourselves. It is our gateway to the subconscious. When we allow ourselves to imagine, we relax our mind and images begin to come to us. And you can tell whether or not you are making up something versus or using what you know versus gaining information from your subconscious, because the information that comes from your subconscious is fresh and new and often offers a new perspective and epiphanies and other lovely things along the way. So that's one way that you can tell. And there are a lot of other ways to do hydromancy. There was actually a horrific custom that was among the ancient Germanic tribes. So if they didn't know when a baby was born, if they were actually the union of the husband and wife, or whether that child was illegitimate, they thought that if they threw the baby into the water, that if it drowned, then it was illegitimate. And if it swam, that it was legitimate. And that's probably what started that whole practice in the 17th century of swimming witches, and I put that in quotes, or the Anglo-Saxon law of trial by water. And I'm sure there are very few people that have heard about that practice that have thought, oh, what a wonderful way to tell whether somebody's legitimate or not. I can only imagine the emotional consequence as your baby drowns that you gave birth to that was the progeny of your husband. You get blamed for not only infidelity, but suffer the loss of that child. I can't even imagine. That's just barbaric. Speaking of other horrific practices, while we're on the topic, necromancy. You've often heard about, avoid the company of necromancers. There are different views of what necromancy means, but my premise is that, and it is also in Wikipedia, that it's a practice of magic that involves communication with the deceased, but not like mediums do it. It's literally by raising them bodily from the dead for the purpose of divination, like using a dead body as your scrying material and to help foretell future events or discover hidden knowledge. It's been used to bring someone back from the dead and as a weapon, like to use the deceased as a weapon. And all I can think about is zombies. So all I want to say is that there is duality in all things. Our intent makes a difference. You could have a stone and someone could pick it up and find grounding with it and find it quite beautiful and use it as an ornament in their home. And another person could pick up that stone and use it to club somebody on the head and take their stuff. So it isn't in the tool. The tools themselves of psychic practice are not inherently good or bad. They're just a tool. They're just like looking at the clouds. Are the clouds bad? Maybe if it's really bad weather, but it's really nothing inherent in it. And so I would categorize necromancy, this kind of zombie creation thing, as the lowest vibrational end of physical mediumship. There's a difference between physical mediumship where a loving spirit passes through the body of the medium and becomes physically apparent to other people in the room because of the kinetic connection that the medium's vibrational pattern and body creates, versus raising the dead and using them like a zombie. So you can understand why people kind of feared and didn't like the idea of raising the dead and using them as divination or a prophetic tool, and that would be discouraged. And I personally don't want to be around anyone who wants to create a zombie. You know, my opinion is run. Anyway, okay, so we talked a little bit about palmistry, but under its other name, chirology. There's pyromancy. Pyromancy is observing flames, and these flames can be from a sacrificial fire, a candle, or any other source of flame. And they interpret the shape that you see within them. There's subdivisions of pyromancy. One of them is allomancy, which is when you cast salt into a fire. Botanomancy, where you start burning plants and relaxing your mind to read the patterns and relationships of things there. Capnomancy, which is looking at smoke. Causinomancy, which is burning any object, really. Causino as in caustic, I guess. Daphnomancy, which is specifically burning laurel leaves. I don't know what's up with laurel leaves, and I'm not sure that it's okay to breathe laurel leaf smoke, but there you go. Different types of pyromancy. There's osteomancy too. There are so many types of osteomancy that osteomancy is basically oracle bones. It's using the bones, either, like if you're sitting around the campfire and you just are about to roast a goat or something, you can take their scapula, which is their shoulder blade, hold it up and look through the clear part to see the shapes and patterns. People used it to both treated with fire and not treated with fire, different ways. And there are lots of others, but that gives you an idea. You can basically use anything to switch your brain from the left conscious to the unconscious, analytical to the intuitive. Color chips, you can draw, you can play music, you can drum, you can chant, spin, dance, start to write, anything that relaxes your mind and helps you hear, see, feel, and know more clearly. There's some more tools of divination and psychic ability, and this is becoming a little bit more sophisticated, perhaps. There's aura reading, where you start opening your clairvoyant sight and seeing the colors and getting impressions from. Aura reading actually opens up your clairsentience, which is your feelings, your clairaudience. Clairaudience is your hearing. And psychometry can do that too, just by touching an object. Bibliomancy is looking at a book and opening it and reading a verse or a chapter that's related to where your finger landed. There's billet reading, where you write your question on a piece of paper, maybe the names of people in spirit, and the medium will either use psychometry by touching it, or telepathy, connecting to your mind, or actual mediumship to read the question that's written there. You can use bones and stones. You can look at crystals, coffee grounds. You can look at the way that soil or rock is thrown, sand is thrown down. They used to have things called druid sticks, and crystallomancy is looking at crystals. Lithomancy is looking at rocks. Druid sticks were pieces of metal that were thrown down. They were all the same length. They were carried and thrown and see how the pattern is when they fall, and use the connections and the spaces and things to start picking up a reading. Some people use oracle cards. I would put that back with sort of the left brain thing, because you basically pick a card and it has a word, and then that's the message. So it's pretty there. The Ouija board is sort of an open portal. I really don't advise it for undeveloped mediums, and I'd urge you to exercise extreme caution. Make sure you protect yourself and instruct your guides clearly as to what you intend from that. Do not get drunk or high and just start messing around with a Ouija board, because it is like a portal. It's like an open portal, and negative entities can attach to the user and stick around after the game. So it's just not cool. You can use photos to read people. It's not the same as face reading. Face reading is more of a technical science. Photo reading is when you start getting the personality of the person. You start picking up details about them. Another way to switch your brain is ribbon readings, where you take pieces of silky ribbon, maybe multicolored ones, and you have your client or yourself choose maybe 3 of them, and you can look at the past, present, future, or a current situation, short term and long term. And somehow by running that ribbon through your hand, it just relaxes you, and you can start getting those images and feelings there. Runes are an interesting way. You can throw runes. Runes have symbols. Tarot has its own giant discipline, and I'm going to assume that everyone's heard of tarot cards. Spirit art is really interesting. It can bridge the gap between psychic all the way over to mediumship. And you can use tea leaves. It's called tassology. And they have these things called Zerner cards, which can develop your psychometry, telepathy, and that's a great beginning, your sort of mind skills. It's a deck of 25 cards, and there are 5 designs. You might have seen them in things on psychics, like a circle, a cross, a box, a star, and a wavy line. And you use that to enhance your telepathic or psychometric training. And so then you get to mediumship, and an individual that functions at the level of mediumship is able to identify and classify and convey the messages from a specific source of information. Other words for a medium might be empath, clairvoyant, prophet, seer, oracle. It's called the discerning of spirits. And with mediumship, there aren't any tools needed. As you unfold your gifts, you may find that it boosts your energy to carry crystals or stones, or to use psychometry, or use a voice imprint, have someone tell me their name, and you can pick up a lot by the vibration of the name. I don't think it's reading always the way that the person said that. I think it has to do with connecting, because when 2 people think of each other instantly, there is a connection. Those can also help boost your connection, but ultimately, you're not going to be using any tools at all. Then as you begin to channel the messages, there are different exercises that you can do or things that occur, I guess would be a better way to say. As you begin to channel, you might automatically write stuff, or you might use glossolalia, which is speaking in tongues. It's speaking the language of the spirit or entity. You might experience personification. It's sometimes called impersonation, and that's when you demonstrate the mental, physical, and habitual characteristics of a spirit or entity. It might be their mannerisms, pattern of speech. Their names might be factual information, specific terminology, phraseology, maybe the actual language, even an accent or a way of speaking. Some people are kind of crude in the way they talk, so you have to maintain your professionalism and always ask your client whether they want to hear the foul language, or at least brace them for it. You never would bring forward any kind of accusatory message, but some people are a little spicy in the way they talk, and that's evidence in and of itself. Anything that provides proof that the medium is conveying messages accurately. And spirit art can become a form of channeling too, at the level that you start drawing the faces of those that have passed, or the guides that have passed. And prophecy is another word for precognition. Precognition is the word for that. And prediction is using that information that you get from astrological or numerological stuff and using it to predict a trend. Premonition is a feeling like something's going to happen. Precognition is a knowing of something that's going to happen. So that's different. And as far as dreams and interpretation of dreams, there is a difference between a vision and a dream. A vision is sort of a waking dream, if you will. They're both valid, and they are authentic connection to spirits. The spirit or being that manifests themselves through the energetic use of the medium in a way that's visible, either through ectoplasm, which is our leukocytes and epithelial cells, protoplasm, or holographic full light appearance. And they can include apports, full or partial bodied apparitions, precipitation, trumpet, etc. And there are a lot of terms associated with that, and I will save those for part 2 of our terms and tools of psychic mediumship. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be here next week for another episode of From a Medium's Perspective. And remember, it's never inappropriate to be kind, and without integrity, you have nothing.